Welcome to Abyss of Horror, where the whispers of the past claw their way into the present, and the air is thick with dread. Tonight's tale is one of secrets buried deep, a ritual soaked in blood and silence. Join me, if you dare. This is the story of the Harvester's Feast. In the isolated village of Gloaming Hollow, time seemed to stand still. Nestled in a valley shrouded by ancient gnarled trees, it was a place forgotten by progress and untouched by modernity. The villagers lived simple, quiet lives. They worked the fields, tended their livestock, and spoke little of the world beyond their borders. But there was one tradition that no one could escape: the Festival of the Harvest. Every 13 years, on the eve of the autumn solstice, the townsfolk would gather in the square to celebrate their bountiful crops. It was a night of music, dancing, and feasting. But the jubilation was hollow, a mask stretched tight over unease. Because every festival night, one villager vanished without a trace. No one spoke of the disappearances. Not the elders who had seen them happen for decades. Not the parents who suddenly found themselves childless. And certainly not the chosen victim, whoever they were. William Harrow arrived in Gloaming Hollow on the cusp of the festival. He was an outsider, a traveler seeking refuge after his carriage broke down on the forest road. The villagers were reluctant to take him in, their eyes darting nervously as they whispered among themselves. But the innkeeper, a gaunt man with a perpetual look of regret, grudgingly gave William a room. The air in the village was thick with tension. Decorations were being hung, rustic garlands of dried wheat and crimson ribbon sew. But no one seemed to celebrate. Faces were pale, voices hushed, and every glance carried the weight of unspoken dread. William, ever the curious soul, asked about the festival. "You'd best stay in your room tomorrow night," the innkeeper muttered, his eyes darting to the shadowed corners of the inn. "Some things are better left unquestioned." But William was not one to heed warnings. The very air of Gloaming Hollow seemed to whisper secrets, and he was determined to uncover them. The night of the festival arrived. The villagers gathered in the square, dressed in their finest, but moving with a stiffness that betrayed their fear. A great bonfire was lit, its flames reaching hungrily into the night sky. The tables were laden with food, roasted meats, golden loaves of bread, and jugs of dark, sweet cider. William wandered among them, his presence an anomaly in the tight-knit community. He noticed the children clinging to their parents, their wide eyes reflecting the firelight. The elders sat apart, their faces carved with grim resignation. And in the distance, the forest loomed, its darkness deeper than the night. As the revelry unfolded, William noticed something strange. The villagers seemed to avoid a particular table near the bonfire, its surface empty save for a single ancient tome. Intricate carvings adorned its leather cover, depicting harvest scenes and something else. Shapes that writhed and twisted, hard to discern but deeply unsettling. His curiosity got the better of him. When no one was looking, he approached the table and opened the book. The pages were filled with an indecipherable script, symbols that seemed to pulse and shift under his gaze. But one thing was clear: a recurring image of a figure with elongated limbs, a featureless face, and hands like scythes. Beneath it, a single word repeated. Harvester. Before he could delve deeper, a hand clamped down on his shoulder. The innkeeper stood behind him, his face ashen. "You've seen too much," he whispered. "It's not your place." The festival reached its climax at midnight. The music stopped, the dancing ceased, and the villagers formed a circle around the bonfire. The air was heavy, charged with an almost tangible tension. William watched from the shadows, his heart pounding. The mayor, an elderly man with trembling hands, stepped into the circle. He carried a small, ornate chest, which he placed at the center. Opening it, he revealed a handful of objects: a lock of hair, a ring, a torn scrap of cloth. Personal belongings, each one. A low murmur spread through the crowd, and then the chanting began. The words were guttural, alien, rising and falling like the tide. The flames of the bonfire twisted, growing taller, their colors shifting from orange to green to an unnatural pulsing black. And then it came. The Harvester. It emerged from the shadows beyond the firelight, its form bending and shifting as though it were made of smoke and flesh intertwined. Its elongated limbs ended in scythe-like claws, and its head was a blank, featureless expanse that seemed to absorb the very light around it. The air grew colder, and a wave of nausea washed over William as he watched. The creature moved with a dreadful purpose, its claws skimming the ground as it circled the villagers. They bowed their heads, trembling as it passed. And then it stopped, turning toward a young woman at the edge of the circle. Her face crumpled in silent despair as the Harvester extended one claw and touched her shoulder. She was the chosen. The villagers broke into wails of anguish as the Harvester swept the woman into its grasp, dragging her toward the forest. Her screams echoed briefly, then were silenced by the oppressive dark. The villagers resumed their chant, their voices hollow, their faces streaked with tears. William couldn't stay silent any longer. As the Harvester disappeared into the trees, he stepped into the firelight, shouting, "What is this madness? How can you let this happen?" The villagers turned to him, their expressions a mixture of pity and fear. The mayor stepped forward, his voice shaking. "It is the price we pay. The Harvester ensures our survival. Without the sacrifice, there would be no harvest, no life. We do what we must." "No," William shouted. "This is barbaric. It's—" The innkeeper interrupted, his voice grim. "You should have stayed in your room, outsider." Before William could react, the chanting resumed, this time louder, more urgent. The bonfire flared, and the Harvester emerged once more, its form towering, its claws glistening. But this time it didn't circle the villagers. It came for William. He tried to run, but the Harvester moved with an impossible speed, its claws wrapping around him. The villagers watched in silence as he was dragged into the forest, his screams fading into the night. The festival ended, the bonfire extinguished, and the villagers returned to their homes. Life in Gloaming Hollow would go on, as it always did. But deep in the forest, where the Harvester's feast was held, the trees whispered of a new addition to its grotesque collection. A curious outsider who had dared to question the ritual. And so the cycle continues, unbroken and eternal. In Gloaming Hollow, the harvest is always bountiful. but the cost is paid in blood and fear. If this tale has stirred the shadows in your heart, then do not let it end here. Like this story, subscribe to Abyss of Horror and share your thoughts below. Perhaps leave the word harvest if this grim ritual still echoes in your mind. But tread carefully, my friends, for some stories demand more than just words.